Cash bail is money that you pay as a deposit for the release of a person who has been arrested. The United States is one of the only countries that uses cash bail with every person incarcerated. There are serious consequences for people who cannot pay their bail.
There's a ton of barriers that people face just by being arrested and not convicted. I was held on a $2,000 cash bail, and I was poor. My family was poor. We were really struggling, so I knew my mom couldn't pay $2,000 to get me out. My mom had 5 boys and 2 girls, and then my dad died when I was 8, so she couldn't afford to pay the bail. And instead of figuring out how to get me out before 18 months was up, and I wasn't even convicted of the crime. I had nothing to do with the crime. But instead of trying to figure out alternatives or something that can help me, continue my life and be successful, they basically held me in jail for 18 months. When I got out of jail after the 18 months, I actually tried to get back into school, and they said you can't go to a regular school because you was locked up and charged as an adult. So they basically tried to make me go to a disciplinary school for 180 days. So it completely got in the way of my education. Plus, when I got out and tried to apply for jobs, people wouldn't hire me because it would come up that I was arrested.
My father was incarcerated in Philadelphia for charges, and we couldn't afford the bail, my family and I. And so just going through that experience of trying to raise the money, and I remember at that moment asking myself, then I was in college, didn't really know too much about the system, but when I was asking my family sort of why, he hadn't been convicted, but why he wasn't here, and to find out that it was purely money that was separating him from being with us, was something that really just, kind of changed me in a way and changed my outlook on the system and really made me passionate about trying to free other people. And in my father's case, eventually all the charges were dropped, but that was time that was taken away from us, time we could never get back. And so from that moment on, I just decided that I would try to work with whatever sort of effort I could to try to stop people from going through that process.
Cash bail is the process by which the courts determine people's eligibility to go home in the meantime while things are being worked out in court. And so depending on the judge, depending on the circumstances, depending on the defendant, they may be asked to offer up money in exchange for their freedom while things are going on in the courts. I think that cash bail is responsible for kind of recreating and perpetuating inequality. If you're a person living in a low-income area, you might be low-income yourself. So low-income people come in, and if you end up being incarcerated because you can't afford bail, you're missing work. Your kids are not going to school if they don't have anybody to bring them to school. Income that isn't coming into the house, bills, it piles on. And if a lot of this is happening in the same area, you have a concentrated disadvantage that's being perpetuated because of the cash bail system. Cash bail is sort of an entry point to the system, and it impacts so many other things. So, for example, about 500,000 people are held on cash bail in our country. I think if we were to end cash bail and free those people and they can be with their families and fight their cases, that'd be a good thing. But also, if someone's held on bail, it impacts so many other things like their cases. So we know that if you're held on bail, you're more likely to plead guilty rather than fight the case. Even if you're held on bail for 3 days, you're likely to lose your job, your housing, and if you're a single parent, you could lose custody of your children. I think a lot of people don't even know about cash bail. I think that, let's say you're a low-income person living in a low-income community, and you know that cash bail exists, you know very well what it is, but you don't necessarily think about it in terms of rich people don't have to worry about this, and that's not fair. It's such a reality that maybe you don't question it. And then on the other side of the spectrum, if you're a high-income person, then you might know people who are involved in the system, and you know that bail exists, but you never have to worry about not affording it. You don't really contemplate it either. When you're paying bail, you're obviously paying it to someone. So in Philadelphia, you're paying it to the courts. Up until recently, the courts, even if you paid bail, even if you were found not guilty, and you showed up to all your court hearings, the court was still taking 30% of your funds that you paid. Private contractors benefit from the process, and
Without bail funds, you have sort of the bail bonds industry that thrives off of vulnerable people who really want their family members home, and so they contact bail bondsmen to pay, but there's an interest, and so it's a whole sort of business in that sense that people thrive off and prosper on.
Cash bail is not constitutional. We literally sat down with lawyers that pulled up the real law, the constitutional law that says bail is supposed to be set based off your ability to pay. So they're supposed to assess my situation and say, okay, you don't have a father at home, he's in a low, poor income community, his bail should be $100. It shouldn't be $2,000. And they're just really using this as a tool to get people to plea out. They don't care if you're innocent or guilty, they just treat you like you're guilty automatically.
The way that the cash bail system is set up, and especially when you take into account impact, we're talking about issues of due process. We're talking about issues of equal protection. That two identical people, in terms of like the offense, age, race, whatever it is, commit the same crime. One can afford bail and one can't. And one thing that some of the research suggests is that whether someone is remanded or not, or is in prison before they go before a judge, some of them who are remanded are more likely to be convicted than those who were out.
I think over the past years, we've seen this real influx of groups challenging the constitutionality of bail across the country. In Harris County and Nevada and other cities. Our Constitution in the 14th Amendment says that we shouldn't deprive anyone of life, liberty, and property without due process. And when you have a system that bases someone's freedom and whether or not they're incarcerated purely on financial ability, it violates that principle.
You can educate yourself about the issue the most by going on Google, doing searches, going on YouTube. There's a lot of videos out that kind of educate you on the wrongs and why cash bail should be ended. And so I think that's a start, but then I think also you have to get involved. I think people need to really get involved with the advocacy to end cash bail. Go to your local organization. There's organizations all over the country that are doing stuff to end cash bail. While I was locked up, I met one of the other co-founders of our organization, the Youth Art Stuff and Power Project. Her name was Sarah Moore. She came in as like an intern. She was like running art and poetry workshops through the Friends Service Committee. And I got involved in the art and poetry workshops, and then I had got out after the 18 months, and 3 other young people got out around the same time, and so we all got together and we brainstormed what could we do to help young people, educate themselves about the system and understand it as a trap, but we also wanted to figure out how could we employ them to do the work. And so then we brainstormed just the organizational structure that we have now. We've been doing it ever since, and that was 12 years ago.
So I'm co-founder of the Philadelphia Bail Fund. We're a nonprofit community fund that posts bail for low-income Philadelphians. We try to intervene at the early possible moment to avoid pretrial detention. I like to say that in addition to bailing out, we try to work every day to put ourselves out of business, in the sense that we want to not only bail people out, but work toward a system where cash bail doesn't exist in Philadelphia.
95% of people bailed out by the Philadelphia Bail Fund appear in court on their scheduled date.
We don't feel like anyone should be held on a cash bail because under law, everybody's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but they're actually treated like they're guilty before they're even convicted. And so that's why we say that it's against the law to hold people on cash bail.
I think across the country, what you're seeing, community groups come together and really play an active role in sort of how their criminal justice system works. But I think in Philadelphia in particular, it's just a very interesting time.
With the help of activists, Larry Krasner was elected District Attorney of Philadelphia in 2017 on a platform of working to end cash bail and mass incarceration. Philadelphia was the first big city to elect a progressive attorney as their top prosecutor.
We have someone in the district attorney's office who at least understands that their role is not purely to prosecute people, but that each individual, whether convicted or not, still has rights, and so we have to balance sort of how you protect those rights while also protecting the community.
There's no risk assessment, there's no tool, there's no computer algorithm that you can use that can predict anything about a person. It's just inaccurate and it's not real.
I don't think that risk assessments are the answer. I know that's the direction we're moving in. I think that if you're concerned with bail or no bail is to make sure people show up to court. I think there are a lot of other ways we can make sure people show up to court without being like excessive and saying, well, somebody who is on welfare maybe doesn't have the reason, maybe has a lot of kids and maybe just makes it or whatever. I don't even think a person who has enough money to afford bail should have to pay for their freedom.
When I thought about risk assessment too, I kind of changed the language of that, and I said, well, why don't we find a tool for success, right? And that tool should have, support services, that should have programs, that should have employment opportunities. We need to create those type of things. They're the only things that can predict a person risk, And so we don't have those things in place. We need to just we need to get rid of those things and not waste our money on that and kind of just create pre-entry or re-entry services so people won't go to jail in the first place. And we have to create things that will address the root causes to why people are committing crimes. That's it.